The neoconservative school of thought can be traced to the University of Chicago's Professor Leo Strauss, who began enunciating its principles by the end of the 60s.
It's sort of a happy happening for hippies.
It was the time of the flower children, of the civil rights battles, of sexual liberation and individual freedom, which had reached levels never imagined before. All of this, however, for Strauss, represented only the seed of a rapid and disastrous decadence for the entire American nation. According to his thinking, individual freedom leads to personal conflicts, which undermine the nation's potential for growth and success. What Strauss envisioned was a compact, uniform society held together by a universal glue that would allow each individual to pour their personal ambitions into a collective movement, all directed toward the outside. But the only way to obtain this was to face the population with a large, dark enemy, whose existence would threaten the survival of the American nation. Among Strauss's most enthusiastic followers was a young Paul Wolfowitz. The idea of creating an evil enemy to bring together a whole nation was certainly not new. From Nero to Hitler, history is filled with examples in which this strategy was used with great success. The novelty introduced by the neocons, however, was that for the first time in history, the adversary would be the entire world. The main obstacle for the neocons was represented by Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State, who pursued with foreign countries a policy of détente based on solid bilateral agreements. But when Nixon was forced to resign due to the Watergate scandal, the neocons were able to place next to the new president, Gerald Ford, a Secretary of Defense who would find himself in the same position some 30 years later, Donald Rumsfeld. Another neocon who was able to take advantage of the situation was Dick Cheney, who became Chief of Staff for the new president. Thus, the White House started to become a familiar territory for these men, who envisioned a strong America that imposed its rule to the rest of the world and led the other nations in the eternal fight of good versus evil. In spite of some relatively quiet times with Russia, it was in fact Donald Rumsfeld who kept trying to enlarge the appearance of an enemy that history itself would later reveal as totally non-existent.
The Soviet Union has been busy. They've been busy in terms of their level of effort. They've been busy in terms of the actual weapons that they've been producing. They've been busy in terms of expanding production rates. They've been busy in terms of expanding their institutional capability to produce additional weapons at additional rates. They've been busy in terms of expanding their capability to increasingly improve the sophistication of those weapons. Year after year after year, they've been demonstrating that they have steadiness of purpose, that they're purposeful about what they're doing.
Since none of this, however, was reflected by the current intelligence, Rumsfeld managed to convince President Ford to create an independent group to re-examine all the information that the CIA had gathered about the Russians from the beginning. The group was called Team B, and it was put under the direction of the neoconservative Richard Pipes, who took under his wing a young and enthusiastic Paul Wolfowitz. Team B's true purpose was to manipulate the CIA's original intelligence with the intent of presenting the Soviet Union as a truly evil nation, equipped with the most powerful secret technology, whose only intent was to annihilate the United States. Naturally, by the end of their task, Pipes and Wolfowitz presented a report containing a truly terrifying image of the Soviet Empire. It was, however, a false image, born of the projection of their own need for a powerful enemy towards which to direct the precious energies of the nation that were being absorbed by a moral relativism that they deemed unacceptable. The new Carter presidency imposed a temporary setback in their path to world domination. The need to quickly reconquer the White House led the neocons to seek an alliance in a totally uncharted territory, the religious one, which accounted for a large amount of potential new votes. Traditionally, the leaders of the different Protestant denominations had kept their flocks away from politics, a world they considered immoral and corrupt. But the fear of falling under communist rule, which would have also brought atheism along, was apparently sufficient to provide the basis for a historic alliance that has lasted ever since.
I'm sick and tired of hearing about all of the radicals and the perverts and the liberals and the leftists and the communists coming out of the closets. It's time for God's people to come out of the closets, out of the churches, and change America. We must do it.
Ronald Reagan won the 1980 election by a landslide. And at that point, the neocons felt they had the right to claim some important positions in the new administration. Paul Wolfowitz became the head of external relations for the White House, while a friend of his from the times of Strauss, Richard Pearl, was appointed Deputy Secretary of Defense. But the great enemy they were seeking was in the meantime collapsing under the weight of internal divisions and corruption. The last attempt by the Soviets to expand their influence was the invasion of Afghanistan in 1980. It was then that the CIA engaged Osama bin Laden and his freedom fighters, providing them with all the logistical, military, and strategic support to push the Soviets back to their borders. With the departure of the Russians from Kabul, the process of disintegration that would lead to the fall of the Berlin Wall had well begun. Before the collapse of the traditional enemy made of chicken wire, the neocons began to entertain the notion of extending their military and strategic control to the entire world.
We want to change some deeply entrenched notions about the proper role of American power in the world.
But controlling the world over the last century has always meant to control the supply of energy, which means to control the oil and gas resources in the Middle East. This is not a new concept at all.
The British checkmated Hitler in Syria when they moved in before the Nazis could take over, thus cutting off a potential source of oil for the German panzer divisions. Iran, too, is the same story. The British, with this coup, control almost all of the Middle East oil supply. This is the oil that Hitler badly needed but lost. And with Russia in the way, he can't win the Caucasian oil fields.
The golden opportunity came with the first Gulf War in 1991. At the crucial moment, however, with the Iraqi troops in total disarray, President Bush decided to stop the push and leave Saddam Hussein at the head of the nation. The ambitions of global control of the neocons suffered another temporary setback, which turned into a never-ending nightmare with the unexpected victory of Bill Clinton in the 1992 elections. Meanwhile, Russia was pulling itself up again, and the neocons could see the opportunity of world domination slip away year after year.
Ever since the Cold War ended, there were people who were fuming on the right, thinking, this is the golden opportunity now that Russia's out of the way for America to take over the world. We're not doing anything about it. Those damn liberals, those soft heads, are keeping us from doing what is our godly mission.
As they sat waiting for the end of Clinton's mandate, the neocons put together the so-called Wolfowitz Doctrine, which established the right of the United States to engage in preemptive war anywhere in the world, in order to avoid other nations from challenging their supremacy. Thus was born a precise strategic plan of global reach, which we have come to know as the PNAC, or Project for the New American Century. After the return to the White House, with the controversial election won by George Bush in the year 2000, the neocons needed to rehash the operation left uncompleted by the father 10 years before. We now find Dick Cheney as Vice President, Donald Rumsfeld as Secretary of Defense, and as his deputy, Paul Wolfowitz. In order to restart the gigantic war machine, however, it would not be sufficient to awaken the Soviet ghosts, which in the meantime had been relegated to the pages of history. A different kind of enemy was needed. It had to be everywhere and nowhere, elusive but ever present, in order to inject in the American population enough fear for them to support a military response of global reach.
يا خيل الله اركبي فاختاروا الخندق الذي تكونون فيه.
With a few touch-ups, Al-Qaeda, which was the name of the database with all the names of the people the CIA had sent to fight with bin Laden, became the name of the most powerful terrorist organization in the world. Bin Laden saw himself accused of the bombings of the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania and of the American ship Cole, without having claimed responsibility for them. The suspicion that someone within the CIA and FBI was building an artificial figure to be used in false flag terrorist operations seems to be confirmed by internal conflicts that have reached as high as the presidency itself.
After the Cole, I had battle plans drawn to go into Afghanistan, overthrow the Taliban, and launch a full-scale attack search for bin Laden. But we needed basing rights in Uzbekistan, which we got after 9/11. The CIA and the FBI refused to certify that bin Laden was responsible while I was there. No one knew Al-Qaeda existed then.
The Western media, however, had already made up their minds. Bin Laden was the bad guy, and from him anything could be expected at that point. On the eve of September 10th, 2001, a full plan to attack Afghanistan with strong support to the Northern Alliance was placed on Bush's table to be signed by the President upon his return from Florida. All that was needed was a detonator to set in motion the operation that would have finally brought America to the strategic control of worldwide resources and the neocons to the realization of their dream. Let's take a step back and read some paragraphs from the final PNAC document, which was published in September of the year 2000. In the chapter called Creating Tomorrow's Dominant Force, we can read, "At present, the United States faces no global rival. America's grand strategy should aim to preserve and extend this advantageous position as far into the future as possible. The United States must retain sufficient forces able to rapidly deploy and win multiple simultaneous large-scale wars. The United States must reposition U.S. forces to respond to 21st century strategic realities by shifting permanently based forces to Southeast Europe and Southeast Asia. The Army's annual budget must increase to the $90 to $95 billion level. Specialized Air Force aircraft, like the J-Stars above, are too few in